All right. Hey, parents, welcome to our nature talks. We usually do these on Wednesdays, but today we're coming in on Monday because we have a really cool special talk that Dr. Steve Collins is going to do for us here. So, Dr. Steve, go ahead and give us a wave real quick. Hey. So I want to tell you guys a little bit about Steve. Steve and I went to, we did our PhDs together, but one thing that's really cool about him is he is one of the few people in the STEM fields who actually bridges multiple disciplines. He's both an engineer and a scientist. And so he kind of gets to see that from all levels. And in addition to being an engineer and a scientist, he is also an amazing dad of two super fun, spunky boys. He is a really big birder. He's got a life list of, I don't know how many birds, but he does a good job at that. And then he also loves odonata, which is basically dragonflies and damselflies. He's also a great photographer. If you guys ever see him online, you'll see these amazing photos of birds and dragonflies. And so he's kind of a multi-passionate person who has all kinds of cool skills that he's going to share with us today. And I asked Steve on here for a specific purpose, and it was to answer the question, why are dragonflies different colors? I'm going to take just 2 seconds and tell you how in the world this question came up. So we have students who come into our program that we work with essentially one-on-one and in small groups, and we've had this student since December. He's just one of those kids you can't help but fall in love with, right? He's super sweet and kind. He's smart. He asks good questions. He's funny. He has all these amazing qualities. And I'm not going to tell you how old he is just yet because I want to say this first. So last week it's his week basically to pick whatever topic he wants to study, and we're going to explore whatever it is that he wants to study. And he asked, well, I'm really curious. Why are dragonflies different colors? They live in a part of Texas where there's lots of water. He sees dragonflies all the time, and he's just curious. They live close to a lake. And he was like, you know what? My hypothesis is that they change colors based on what they eat. And then we got to talking about flamingos. And it was just a really cool conversation. And this week was his chance to do some research and explore, is his hypothesis supported by evidence or is it not? And if it's not, then what does that look like? And I want to tell you guys, this child is 5 years old. And that's what's beautiful about what we do in Nature Matters Academy. We take in all types of kids and we just help them follow their curiosity, ask questions, and then help them to answer them. And so that's what we're doing here today with Dr. Steve Collins. Steve, if there's anything else that you would like to tell us a little bit about yourself, please go ahead and do that. And then maybe before we start talking about coloration, you can just kind of tell us a little bit about dragonflies in general.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. I'm surprised you remember so much about me.
It's been a few years, huh?
Yeah. But thank you. Thanks for having me on here. I thought it was so incredibly perceptive of your student to have asked that question, because I think he's off to a great start because he or she wasn't, I was in college by the time I realized that there were dragonflies of different colors and a lot of different species. So most people so some of your students may know there's a lot of different birds around, right? And there's bird guides that they might have seen before. And so, there's about 800 or 900 species of birds have been recorded in North America, but dragonflies are almost as diverse. And so dragonflies, there's about 500 species of dragonflies in North America. And, whereas birds specialize on different types of habitats. You'll find a puffin or a penguin in different types of habitats than you'd find a robin or a Clark's nutcracker, or I'm trying to think of what you might have over by you.
We have all kinds of jays. We have
lots of jays, Steller's jays and blue jays, right? A jay that you might have in your backyard is going to be different than a duck you have at the pond. They need different types of food. They need different, one needs water, the other doesn't have to live in the water. And so dragonflies are really kind of the same way. And dragonflies have been around for longer than birds, right? So dragonflies have been around since the Carboniferous period, which was pre-Jurassic, right? The dinosaurs were Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. So Carboniferous was before that. And the dragonflies have been around for a really long time. So they're really primitive insects. There's fossils you can find of them. And back in the Carboniferous period, there was so much oxygen in the air that those dragonflies had wingspans 3 or 4 feet wide. There were these massive dragonflies. So they are very successful. They've survived all that time by doing what they do best. And one of the things they do best is they're really good predators. They have these amazing eyes, and the eyes wrap, they can see all the way around them. Their eyes wrap all the way around their heads. And when they choose to go after something, so they'll be on a perch, if you've ever seen this, right? And then they'll fly out and they'll catch something and go back. And a lot of times when they make the decision to go out and catch that fly, I think they're one of the most have one of the highest success rates of any predator in the world. I think it's something like over 80 or 90%
Really?
If they choose to go after it, they actually are successful. And they can fly, forwards and backwards, and they have 4 wings. Dragonflies they're really kind of amazing. And I think it's really awesome that your student was so perceptive to want to talk about them. So I was thinking I wanted to help answer their hypothesis the best way, to the best of my ability. So the hypothesis of, well, are they lots of different, was the hypothesis that they're different colors because of what they eat, or that they get their color from what they eat?
Oh, it may be that they get their color from what they eat.
So I think that your student is your 5-year-old perceptive student is correct, right? So what dragonflies eat, there'll be pigments in their food, or browns and reds and yellows, kind of like when you eat your vegetables, right? Mm-hmm. When you eat your vegetable, you don't turn green, and the dragonfly really doesn't turn the same color as what they eat, but the pigments that are in the food, they incorporate into themselves. And they can, therefore, a lot of their colors might be, so when the yellows and the reds and everything like that, it technically is, that's the best kind of correct, is technically correct. So
right.
That is where the colors come from. One of the other really neat things about dragonfly colors, and is this sharing my screen? Because I couldn't explain this very well.
Let me do that.
But there's also something else called structural color. And so blue is very rare in nature. There's not very many animals and plants that are truly blue or have a blue pigment. And so when you see birds or dragonflies that are blue, it's not actually blue pigment. Like, you can't grind up a blue dragonfly and get blue paint out of it. What's actually happening is that there's, and that you can kind of see it in this figure here, but there's a microscopic nanostructure to the feathers in this indigo bunting or onto a dragonfly that's going to let all of the light in except for blue. And blue is going to reflect off. And since that blue reflects off and everything else gets absorbed, you see blue, right? So the structure is actually acting like a prism. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a prism that might scatter yellow light coming from our sun and make a rainbow. And so what this does, it's kind of like a blue, subtracting out the blue from the rainbow so that it will absorb all the rest of the rainbow, and that blue will be reflected off, and therefore you see that blue. So here's something that I wanted to talk about that I thought was really interesting. So the 3 dragonflies on this picture are all the same species. These are all widow skimmers. Is somebody going to be able to chat in if they have a question? I don't want to make this seem like a presentation.
Yes, I'm on the chat in. So if anybody has a questions, you guys just go ahead and type it straight in. Right. And then we'll let you know. And hold on, Steve, give me just a second. Great. Yeah, I'll let you know.
Okay, sure thing. So the dragonfly in the middle here, when it first emerges, so dragonflies, they live as aquatic bugs, right? And they're predators when they live in the water too. and they might live for 2 weeks in the water in some species, and others might live for 8 years under the water. And then they emerge and they crawl out of their skin and they dry their wings off. And the colors that they get as an adult are those yellows and those reds and those browns and those pigment colors. But then a lot of, in some species like this widow skimmer, when they get older, you start getting something called pruinosity. And pruinosity, you can see it on the wings here and then also on the body. And it's this waxy substance that actually certain dragonflies get as they get older. And so that waxy substance makes the body here blue, and it makes the wings, the middle of those wings white, and that's structural color. So that's there's no pigment there, but where the blue is not the pigment, but it's reflecting kind of that blue light. And so that's a way that they can tell in each other apart. So that's how they'll be able to say this middle one is a young male, is a young boy, and this one is an older boy. Whereas you can see that the middle one, which is the young one, the young boy, looks a lot like the girl on the left. So the female on the left the young males look a lot like females. And so does anybody on there, do you know why why sometimes young animals who are boys might look more like the girl, and then when they get older, they look a little different? Is anybody who's on there might know why? I can tell you the answer, but I bet you somebody knows.
Repeat it one more time, Steve, because it usually takes people a little bit of time to be able to type.
Sure. So a lot of animals, including dragonflies, the young males, the boys, look a lot like the girls. But then when they get older, the boys will look different, and they'll have a different coloration pattern. And I was just wondering, do you know why that might be, why that's important, or how that's useful to them? So,
yep, go ahead. We don't have anyone writing in yet. I'm wondering if it has something to do with territory.
So that's really important.
Wait, hold on. I do have one. So the adult males don't attack them.
That is very perceptive, and that's 100% right.
And this is the dad of the little boy who asked the question. So you can see it's, it got smart parents too.
So they do have territories, and like if you're looking at around a pond where you might see a lot of dragonflies, or in a river, they'll set up territories and they'll fiercely defend them. So they'll scare away other males. And what the reason they want to set up that territory is they want to be able to get the girlfriend. So when the female comes down to the water to lay eggs, they want to be there to fertilize the eggs and to father those eggs. So when somebody looks like a girl, like the boy, they're not really a threat. They're not perceived as a threat. But if somebody has these flashy colors, and then all of a sudden they can recognize, no, you're in my territory, I don't want you there, and they'll try to chase each other away. So, and this is a dragonfly called an ebony jewel wing. And so what they'll do is they actually have this elaborate mating display. But one of the things they do is they'll clap their wings together, those black wings, and they use their colors to both scare away other boys, other males, but then also the girls will use their colors and their display to let prospective mates know that they're okay to be boyfriend and girlfriend. So that's how they might use colors. Nice. So another way that dragonflies use colors is to warm up, right? And I'm sure you guys have seen this, where you might see, especially early in the morning, you might see dragonflies perched on the ground or on a tree or on a leaf, and they're trying to warm themselves up because they're solar powered, right? They're solar powered insects. So they need, they're not warm blooded, they're called cold blooded. So they need the sun's energy to warm themselves up. But at the same time, dragonflies can do this really neat thing called obelisking. And so what obelisking is is you can see that this one's trying to warm itself up, and this one is obelishing, and so are the ones over here too. And what they'll do is they point their abdomen at the sun, almost like a sundial, right? And so, and when they point it at the sundial, there's gonna be like no shadow beneath them. So wherever the sun is, they're gonna point straight at the sun, and they're trying to reduce the amount of their body that is getting sunburned, right? It has the sun shining on it. And so that's how they, when it's really, really hot out, that's how they actually cool themselves off. Because not only do they need the sun to warm up in the morning, but they can overheat. So that's one of the things that's really important for both color in dragonflies is thermal regulation. So I have another question for some of the students out there. Do you think that in an environment where it's cold, like maybe the top of a mountain or farther north, or really early in the spring when it's still cold out, do you think those dragonflies might be brighter or darker than dragonflies where it's warmer? Does anybody have an idea? If you think that where it's cold, and remember these dragonflies, they need to warm up in the sun. So where it's cold, do you think they're going to be generally dark, or do you think they might be bright colored or white, or how do you think those dragonflies might look? Does anybody have any ideas?
This is a great question. Teresa, if you don't mind typing that into the chat for us. If anyone has an idea. All right. Liam says darker.
Darker where it's cold. And you're absolutely right. That was so a lot of times this is something, and I just grabbed some of these pictures quickly, but I mean, these are called emeralds. So these have these metallic dark colors, and they're very pretty dragonflies, but they're really dark. And these are entirely boreal, right? This is a boreal species, and boreal means that it only lives where there's like conifers, so spruce trees and fir trees, and where it's really kind of cold. There's dragonflies that live there, and they're all really dark, and that's so that they can warm up in the sun. And so dragonflies where it's warmer, they might not be so dark. So that's one way that they've actually been able to evolve and adapt to the environment where they live. So you have these dark colors where they need to warm up. And so I want to tell you one more thing that's actually really kind of interesting about some of these dragonflies. So not everybody can do this, not every dragonfly, but some dancers. And dancers are a type of damselfly. They're the ones that have their wings held behind their back and they're real skinny. Some of those can actually change their color depending on the environment. And some darner dragonflies can actually do the same thing. So when they're nice and warm, they'll be blue, nice and blue like this dragonfly here. And then when it's early in the morning or it's at nighttime or they're cold, they won't be as blue anymore. And what actually happens there is those pigments, those really dark that might show black, those pigments move when they get colder. They move towards the surface of the skin cells, or it's not skin, but of the surface cells, the cuticle, and that makes them darker. And so why do you think it might be, why do you think that, again, when they get darker, that's going to help them warm up, right? And it's also bonus if they're cold and they're cold-blooded. Do you think they want to be brightly colored when they can't move around so well? They can't fly because they're too cold. So what it helps them do is it might help them camouflage. Mm-hmm. So then a predator is not going to be able to see them when they're so cold that they can't get away. So that's something that's kind of interesting about them, is that, and then when the sun comes out, those little particles, microparticles, will move a little further down, and there'll be this more brightly blue color like you see in the top there, and they won't and therefore they won't be absorbing as much of the sun's energy.
That's really cool because it's like this play between the structural coloring, which is the blue metallic, versus the pigmentation. And when the pigment moves closer to the surface, then essentially it's, I don't want to say disabling, but like the structural pigment isn't reflecting the light as well. I mean, that's really cool. I had no idea dragonflies could change color within a day, according to temperature. This is really interesting.
Yes. Well, this is exciting. This is exciting stuff. And I'm glad that your student had the asked the question. And so one of the last things I just wanted to show here is this is a photo I took a couple years ago. So can anybody see why I took a picture of this log? Does anybody see this tree? Do you see what's on there?
If anyone does, speak up because I can't see it. I know it's there, but I haven't seen it yet.
There's kind of a lichen here.
Mm-hmm.
And that lichen, lichens are a symbiotic relationship in mushrooms and cyanobacteria or algae. Is that what I took a picture of? Is there something else on there? Does anybody else see it? I see nothing.
Oh, that's great. Is it towards the bottom?
Right in the middle. Let me zoom in on this.
Oh, wow.
Do you see it now?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a Canada darner, and it's the male. And this was early in the morning when it was kind of cold out. And you can see that not only is it not brightly colored, the blues are very subdued, but it blends right in with that tree trunk, so that it's really good camouflage in certain species. Liam says the crack there is the black one. Yeah, I
love it. Good job.
Liam found it.
Good job, Liam.
So does anybody else have any questions or anything they want to ask me about for dragonflies? And it could be anything at all. It doesn't have to be colors.
Yeah, well,
that was a good question.
Yeah, it was. Well, you guys are asking or thinking about asking a question, because I know that it takes a while to think of one and then type it, and it takes a bit of a process. So I just want to mention that the question, why are dragonflies different colors? Like, that surface level seems very simple, right? But think about it. How many of us actually stop and think, why are they different colors? And then second of all, take it to the next level and try to find out. And it's that gap kind of where Nature Matters Academy lives, because our kids ask so many wonderful, bright questions. And to be honest, we can only answer so many questions a day, right? Because they come up with thousands. And so we kind of have to pick and choose which ones we can focus on. But those questions, even though they seem simple, if we take it and look at it deeper, not only is it incredibly complex and beautiful and wonderful, but we're learning new things. I learned a lot just from what we're learning about here, and just from Dr. Steve's presentation. So I just want to kind of remind you guys of that, is that simple questions are usually never simple. There's always a super cool answer in the back end that we know nothing about, but we get to go and discover with our kids. So we encourage you guys to get out with your kids today, let them ask questions, and then take one question and go a little bit deeper with it and try to learn more about it. And if you feel like you can't, whether it's a time thing or maybe it's just a knowledge-based thing, that's where Nature Matters Academy comes into play. You can ask us, and then we can help your kids, and we can go on this journey with them and with your family. So, Steve, I'm not seeing any questions. Oh, I have one from Annie right here. Why don't dragonfly wings have more color? Oh, and that looks like it was from Theo. Super sweet. He's watching. I love it. Why don't they have more color, the wings?
Sometimes they do. And so in this here is actually a dragonfly wing. And there's a very special, real zoomed in right here. And there's a very special dragonfly that lives in the tropics, in the American tropics, that does have this brightly blue iridescent. But in terms of why some have it and some don't, so a lot of times when the ones who do have it, it's a signal. So the boys are using for territorial signals, or they might use it as a signal between the males and the females, like I showed you with these jewel wings, damselflies. They communicate with their wings, and they have these really dark wings to be able to, the girls have little white dots on them. And so that's how they can tell if it's a girl or a boy really easily. But a lot of times, I guess I don't know the answer to that. But I do think that I bet the ones who are not colored in the wings don't need to be. So one of the things you find with a lot of animals is that something that's successful for them gets passed on, right? So if somebody has some dark in the wings and they're able to then, live an extra week longer than their neighbor because it helps them avoid being eaten, or it helps them find food, or if it makes them have more babies and they're more successful in having babies, then that trait gets passed on. And if somebody else has a trait and they have less babies or they don't live as long, then those traits tend not to be passed on. So whereas I don't know exactly why you might see more dragonflies with clear wings than those with dark wings, I bet you that there's an advantage to having clear wings in some circumstances. And so maybe that's because, they don't want to overheat, since if they're trying to put their wings out, if they had really dark, they would be absorbing a lot of the sun's energy and that would make them hot. Whereas, that reflective wing I showed you, I said that was tropical. So that's reflecting a lot of the light. Maybe that doesn't make them quite as hot. These also live in shady places. So these tropical dragonflies, they live in really dense shade. These jewel wings live in really dense shade. So that's an interesting idea. I don't know the answer for you, but I bet you there's something to do with that the ones who live in darker environments where they want to warm up, or where it's not going to be detrimental, where it's not going to hurt them if they warm up too much, are going to be the ones who are darker overall and have that dark coloration on the wings.
Nice. And again, guys, that was an amazing, great question that seems really simple on the surface, but in reality, it's really complex. And that was Dr. Steve's son. So again, young ages, kids asking amazing questions. All right, we have one more for you, Steve. We have a lot of the bright orange skimmers here. Do you know if they change their color too? Is there a big difference between the male, females across all species of dragonflies? Is there a big difference between the males and females across all species of dragonflies? So first of all, skimmers, do you know if they change their color too? And then the differences between males and females just across the board?
So the skimmers, the bright orange ones that you saw, if you're in Texas, those maybe are carmine skimmers. I'm guessing.
She's in New Mexico.
What's that?
New Mexico.
So maybe one of the, wouldn't be carmine skimmer there. Flame skimmers. So those are kind of a reddish orange, and those you might find around a pond in New Mexico. And so those, yes, they're going to be brighter as they get older. And so that orange coloration is some of that pruinosity I was talking about, that like this was an example of the widow skimmer. So that on the flame skimmer, that they actually get kind of, when they get older, they get redder. So when they first emerge, they're going to look, the girls' flame skimmers aren't quite as bright. And the young boys, when they first emerge, they're also not quite as bright. And so they develop that darker coloration. In terms of, can they change their colors as an adult? No, that kind of, once they get it there, it sticks. So they can't make themselves brighter or colder. But they are sexually dimorphic. So the males will look different than the females. The boys will look different than the girls. In a lot of species, to our eyes, the boys and the girls might look exactly the same, except they have, different genitalia. So they might look exactly the same to us. But one of the things that I didn't mention is that dragonflies, like butterflies and like a lot of birds, they can see ultraviolet, whereas we can't see ultraviolet. So something that we see, like that flame skimmer, it looks really vivid orange to us. But if we could see farther into the spectrum and we could see that ultraviolet, you can imagine it'd blow your mind. It'd be so incredibly brightly colored. And so a lot of insects do reflect ultraviolet. And so sometimes the boys might be really brightly colored compared to the girls, but to our eyes, we can't tell the difference. But they're not trying to show it to us necessarily, right? They're trying to show their colors to each other. So there you go.
Nice. Oh, and Steve, thank you so much. This was so wonderful, very educational. I'm excited to be able to show this to my boys and get them asking some questions too. So people are already typing in saying thank you for coming and sharing with us today. We really appreciate it.
This was a lot of fun. Thanks for inviting me. And
Absolutely.
Thanks for your questions, everybody.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks, Steve.